Happy Friday, everybody. How's it going?
It's going
Awesome.
well. It sounds like we have a few things to talk about today, Niel.
Yeah,
Yeah. We're
happy to. There's never a scarcity of opinion from Niel Nickolaisen.
We're
not
looking
at all.
forward to it.
No.
Now, there's a scarcity of accuracy and correctness, but never opinion.
This is awesome. No, it's gonna be a fun chat. For people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. Niel Nickolaisen, currently the CIO at Sorensen Communications. I've spent the last 20-ish years of my career doing IT turnarounds, IT transformations of some way, shape, or form. I got into IT, I came into IT from outside of IT. I was the VP of operations for a consumer packaged goods company. And I spent a portion of every day committed and dedicated to complaining about IT. So one day, just to shut me up, they made me the CIO. So the only role I've ever had in IT has been either CIO or CTO. It's been a great ride. I fell into it out of anger and spite, and I've loved every minute because it's always challenging, it's always changing. And as time goes on, I think we've become much more not just mission critical, but future critical for the organization. And so I just feel like it's been a wonderful experience. I'm in the right thing at the right time for someone with my marginal skills.
We took what would have been a white elephant gift and turned it into something a bit more promising. So congrats.
Yeah, I went into we'd had a particularly bad deployment that had shut us down. The company I worked for, all of our software was homegrown, including all the stuff that controlled our distribution systems. And it was the peak of our year, shipping 60 to 70,000 orders a day. And they had planned on a new upgrade of our distribution system software. And I told them, you can't deploy it during busy season because they didn't have a testing environment. So any changes went straight into production. I said, you can't do it during busy season, We'll do it in February. And I came in one day to find out that they had deployed it the night before during busy season. And it took us about 2 months to recover. So when that was over, I met with the CEO and I said, John, you've got 5 minutes to decide. Either fire the CIO and his entire staff or I'm quitting. I've got a job opportunity. I'm out of here.
Right.
I can't live like this anymore. And it wasn't my intention, wasn't my plan. But 5 minutes later, he said, okay, I'm tired of you complaining about it all the time. If you think you can do better, do better. So anyway, that started my IT career. And like I said, had a wonderful time, just an amazing career.
What's been your favorite part about IT?
If I had to pick one thing, I think it's, and I kind of mentioned this, I think of it this way. When I first got into IT, our job was to support the business define the enterprise. Let's expand it beyond business. Any organization defines sort of its business rules, its business needs, and then we would either develop or select, technologies to support that need. But I think what's happened, to me, this is digital transformation, is that now all innovation is fueled by some changes and advances in technology. And so our role has changed from a support organization to influencer for the future, because every business process, business rule, everything is now generated by changes in technology. Marketing has completely changed. Sales has completely changed. You still got the laggards in accounting. I would always tell the accounts, look, I understand your accounting rules haven't changed since they created the double entry booking system in 1573. I understand you're kind of laggards, but at some point you got to get on the board with technology. But everything now is fueled by changes in technology. So our role has shifted from support to, I'm going to call it guide, influencer, maybe the definer, or I've described it this way. Since all possibilities in the enterprise now come through technology, we need to view our role as the chief possibility officers instead of the chief information officers. So what are the possibilities? What are the technologies we should be pursuing? And how do I get the organization to buy in and to seize those opportunities and those possibilities? So for me personally, I've enjoyed the evolution of the role because it's forced me to be on my toes and to change my approach to everything I do. It's changed my approach to leadership, developing culture, analysis, what I do with data. I can go down the list. I've just had to, almost every day, I've had to learn how to do something differently or better.
I think traditionally IT, let's say 20 years ago, 10 years ago, in the corporate sector was viewed as a cost sink. In fact, I frequently still see that mentality. It's just a place where you throw money for basic services. But of course, companies like Google and Amazon have changed that perspective where IT is the product, like everything revolves around IT. Do you think that mentality is kind of spreading from Silicon Valley to other corporations? And how long will that process take?
It's a great question. I think in my career, my 20-ish year career, I've seen that, at least the companies I've worked for, that attitude has changed, where the cost still matters, but probably what outweighs cost is opportunity or upside. But there are plenty of laggard organizations. Believe me, there are plenty of them. My personal rule of thumb is if somebody calls me and said, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you about being about a CIO role," or "Do you know somebody who might be a fit for a CIO role?" One of the first questions I ask is, "Does the CIO report to the CEO or the CFO?" Now, I've had some great CFOs that I've worked with, really have, but sort of just mentally, if the IT organization is part of the finance organization, finance tends to, and accounting tends to be more focused on cost management than opportunity realization. Now that's a generalization. I had two great CFOs I worked with. One of the best ever. When you come to him with an idea or an opportunity, never got you into, okay, show me the 3-year cost benefit analysis. How accurate is this? It was, "Dave, here's an opportunity. Oh, what do you think we'd get out of it? I think it this. Well, how much do you think we'd have to invest? I think about this. I think it's worth doing." And there was the approval process with finance. Right. I think it's worth doing. And then the thing I've always enjoyed is part of in our role as becoming influencers and guides is we have to have credibility. It's hard to follow somebody that has low credibility. So I want the business case to be tight enough that it'll come true so that I don't get grilled the next time I come up with one. And so getting it right is still important, but it's hard to get it exact. And it might not be worth the effort to get it exact because there's just so much uncertainty. The future is so unknown. Before Sorensen, when I was at OC Tanner, we would do sort of annual planning from a product and IT perspective, but we would update those on a quarterly basis. And it took a while for the rest of the company to get into this cadence and understand, I wish I knew what was going to happen in a year. So
don't we all?
So I'm gonna plan, but then I'm gonna hedge. Right. And the hedge is if something happens we didn't anticipate, or if something better comes along, I can reshuffle the deck. I can say, okay, this was my number 1 priority 9 months ago. It's now become my number 3 priority because these other 2 things are more important now. And I think that's that's a discipline, or maybe less of a discipline. I think that's an attitude that the organization has to adopt. And that's why these CFOs that I've loved working with, they embrace that notion that they can't know for sure.
That's really interesting. Why do you think that companies and departments and other stakeholders they want to tie themselves down to something that's predictable in almost kind of a top-down fashion, like they could control the future?
I think it's just human nature.
Mm.
Uncertainty creates anxiety. And I think just our animal instincts, we dislike anxiety. We dislike uncertainty. Predictability is a wonderful thing to have. But I think at this point in our lives, given all the things that are happening around us, even before the pandemic, just all the changes in technology, all the changes in business models, all the changes in business rules, all the changes in everything, you just have to accept that the future is unknown. So how do I hedge for it?
Mm.
What can I do so that I can, even if I can't control the future, how can I have some level of control over my future by being adaptable and being able to roll with the punches more? I'm not sure organizations exist anymore like they did 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago that had such market control, that they were the market makers and could say, here's what the next 10 years for our organization are going to look like, and nothing's going to change that. I just look at some of the things like in our security stack. There are great tools today that didn't exist 3 years ago. There are threats today that didn't exist 3 years ago. There are probably great tools today that didn't exist a year ago. There are threats that exist today that didn't exist a year ago. So if I'm locked into saying, here's my prediction for what's going to happen, and I'm going to slave everything to my prediction, I'm going to be wrong a lot. And I just hate being wrong a lot. I'll accept being wrong sometimes, but I just don't want to be wrong a lot.
Well, it's funny, this term prediction. So Joe hears me rant about this a lot, and that is I really don't like the term prediction. And the reason is that it expresses this notion that you actually can predict the future. Now, I think there are a lot of interesting things you can do with data with respect to the future. You can look at scenarios, you can look at probabilities. That's what a prediction should be, but it shouldn't be like, oh yeah, the sales for the next quarter are going to be this. Like, well, they might be this, or various other factors could come into play. And I think changing the language is helpful for us to kind of shift our mental frame to think in terms of different possible outcomes and prepare for multiple possibilities.
Yeah, well, I just pulled out a book here. What is it? Matching supply with demand. I have a like you, kind of operations background, right. but it's funny when you read these books because it works until it doesn't, right? It assumes that your inventory and supply chain processes are humming along, but then you get a pandemic and that all kinds of, as we realize. I mean, we were talking about this before, just trying to find materials to build a house, or even trying to go to a fast food restaurant. I mean, there's nothing certain about those things. That used to be a given. You can go to a drive-through and pretty easy nowadays.
And not wait 45 minutes.
Yeah. Right.
That's why you went to the drive-through. It's not wait 45 minutes.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, and I don't see it. I don't see the pace of change slacking in any way, shape, or form. It's almost like once Al Gore invented the internet, then change breeds faster change, which breeds faster change, which breeds faster change, and it's like I said, creates anxiety for organizations because our practices have been built around predictability and certainty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like kind of the models that Deming and another had come up with back in the day with kind of time tracking everything and so forth, right? I mean, because I think the assembly line mentality really lent itself to a predictable world, but it's
right.
There's just so many other factors right now. And I think the biggest factor, which we kind of hit on earlier, is information, right? Like digitalization of things and information. When you live in a low information environment, like you did in the 50s or the 20s or whatever, it's a much different situation. But when everything flows in real time, there's countless vectors of disruption.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a great point.
So how do you back to the kind of the title of the discussion, like how do you win with IT in a very uncertain environment?
Well, and I put the pressure on IT because in our role as influencers, one of the things I've learned in doing my sort of IT transformation turnaround stuff is that I can do my work in IT and make us agile, adaptable part of the organization. But at some point, if I don't get some level of that same culture, those same practices, those same thought processes in the rest of the organization, it's going to create a lot of friction. If I'm doing adaptive planning in IT using agile methods where we define outcomes and then define what we think will generate those outcomes, and then start doing hypothesis testing, and then based on the hypothesis testing, select what we think is the good starting point, and then iterate from there. Well, if I've got a CFO and a VP of sales and a CEO who are expecting 3-year revenue plans, those are incompatible, and it's going to create friction. Early in my career, I used to thought, okay, I'll be a translation layer. I'll make our agile things look like spreadsheet plans, forecasts, but it didn't work. And so I think part of it is recognizing that I have to really work on my influencer muscles and practices. But that begs the other question: how do I do that? So anyway, here are the things I've done that I think have helped me. First of all, agile principles really do work. When I think about what's the best way to deal with uncertainty, it's iterative methods to life, hypothesis testing. Like, for example, doing a business case. I think it's hard to do a long-term business case, but I think you can prove a hypothesis, or at least test a hypothesis. So rather than doing something on a massive scale, let's do it on a tiny scale, evaluate and measure the results, measure the outcomes, and ask ourselves, are these worth expanding? Or do we need to change them? I'll just give you a quick example. Years ago, I got into a turnaround CIO role. It was and the organization had 8 different CRM systems scattered around the organization. And I got there and I kind of pitched this idea of, wouldn't it be wonderful if every interaction we had with a customer were available to everybody else who interacted with that customer? There's a desired outcome. Could we improve our customer intimacy? Could we improve our customer relationships? Could we improve our interactions if anyone who dealt with that customer saw their entire lifetime of interactions with us? Their orders, the calls they'd made, the chats they'd had, the products they'd purchased, everything we know about that person. So let's make our information, going back to what you said, Joe, let's make our data customer-centric rather than department-centric. And so everyone's on board. Okay, great. There's a desired outcome. And then, each of the 8 departments said, that's wonderful as long as we standardize on mine. So now we got this problem. So, okay, well, let's work on this. And the way we approached it, I got my team together and I asked the departments, who on your team are the persons who are the most opposed to migrating onto a single platform if it's not yours, if it's not the one you use today. So I ended up with 10 names. So I got 10 people. The 10 people who just don't want to ever see me or talk to me because I'm going to rip the thing that they love the most out from their lives. And we met with these 10 people, my team did every day, and just asked them, what decisions would you like to make about our customers? What information do you need in order to make those decisions? And then what's the best way for us to gather that information, which started to define the transactional flows. How are we going to gather information through our transactional systems like a CRM? So I meet with this group of 10 people for about a half hour. Then the team would take what they learned and they would configure in our proposed CRM system, some transactions that they thought would meet those needs. Next morning, same 10 people. Here's what we heard as manifested in the workflows we've built. What should we change? Okay, what comes next now? What else would you like to decide about a customer? What information do you need to do it? And what's the best way for us to gather that information? Over the course of about 45 days, my team and these 10 people who didn't want to do this, but then ended up being the biggest cheerleaders for this initiative, for the new project, built out the system. And it was like the smoothest implementation in the history of mankind, because after 45 days, we had a working system that achieved the objectives, and we'd reduced the resistance, the implementation resistance dramatically, because these 10 people went back to their apartments and they're like, after a couple of weeks, they're like, oh, life's going to be so much better. They became our cheerleaders. They became our advocates. So what principles came from that pretty massive change? It was listening. It was outcomes based. The outcome was, what decisions would you like to make about a customer? What information do you need to get there? And where can we get the information? And we did it iteratively, once every day, the next version, every day, the next version, every day, the next version. And because of that, the feedback loops were really short, one day long. But along with that, we also leveraged one of the ground rules I'd imposed on the team was, unless there's a really compelling reason, no exception handling and no customizations. Because exception handling minimizes your agility. Customizations to a package minimize your agility. And so I think so that's another principle I think that comes up is, if you're selecting as an IT leader or as IT organization or as any organization a market leading system, you should assume it can do the basics. It probably supports the major functionality, the transactional flows that you need in your organization, which begs the question, why change them? Because as soon as you change them, then anytime there's an external or internal change in your environment, you got to go back and redo that. I'll give you another example. I once inherited an ERP system with 24,000 customizations.
Wait, customizations?
Customizations to an ERP, which are pretty standard. Everyone customizes their ERP. 24,000, that's crazy.
That's a lot, yeah.
Some years ago, India changed their tax laws and implemented the GST tax. Well, the ERP provider had been keeping track of the GST tax as it moved through the Indian political system. They had a module ready. Most of their customers were able to implement the Indian GST module in 1 or 2 weeks. Not us. It took a dedicated team of really smart people about 9 months to do, because the module obviously didn't work with our, let's say it's only 800 of our customizations. So we had to somehow navigate through that complexity. So one of my other rules is, when it comes to, I use a model where we segregate our activities based on 2 dimensions. What extent does this create market differentiation? And to what extent is it mission critical? If an activity creates market differentiation and is also mission critical, it deserves innovation and creativity, because it's our organizational superpower. It's why people choose us. Of all the options, including doing nothing or doing it themselves, they choose us because we're amazing at these 1, 2, or 3 things. That's it. 1, 2, or 3. Well, what about everything else? Well, it falls into a category mission critical. We can't live without it. We have to send invoices so we can collect money. But it's unlikely we win in the marketplace because our superpower is the elegance or uniqueness or creativity associated with our invoicing process. Yet, how many organizations spend time and create complexity and do exception handling where none is required, doing something unique and compelling with invoicing? No. Stop it. You create this complexity, then you have to navigate through. Anytime something changes, now you got to touch invoicing. So these, I call them parity processes. Parity processes, one of the ways to improve organizational agility is leave parity processes alone. You don't need to invent them. Somebody's already figured it out. Just do it the way the best in class does it. let me invent how to make a great customer experience. Let me invent how to make my product significantly better, but I don't have to connect that to my invoicing process or my general ledger structure or my, there's like a billion things I don't have to waste my innovation on. So that's another thing that I found is to be important. So hypothesis testing, do things iteratively, short learning cycles. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff. Just focus on clarity, simplicity, and standardization, and just let it flow. I've had people call me and then, some of my CIO friends, hey, we're struggling with this. I said, learn enough about lean that you can do a value stream map and that you know the 7 forms of waste. And then look for waste in your processes. Anything that creates friction or turbulence is something you probably should change. You want things to flow. Just think of flow, just like we do with anything else. We think about software development flow. How can I reduce the friction from writing a piece of functionality to getting it deployed in production? Do the same analysis. What can I do to reduce the friction, reduce the turbulence, and improve the flow? And I think if you're taking that approach, you're becoming an agile enterprise, an agile organization. And once you're more agile, once you've reduced that friction, reduced that turbulence, you can adapt. And because you're fast, you can adapt quickly. And maybe that's the ultimate superpower, is to adapt quickly.
I mean, you see this with companies like Amazon, for example, right? I mean, they're large, but they move at frightening speeds for like super heavyweights. It's scary. It scares startups, rightfully so. Can you say something about?
Oh, yeah. So first of all, with Amazon, I mean, that maybe they're the exception to this rule where they're so big that they can't really afford to build everything in-house, right? They are fundamentally an IT shop. Even though they're an online retailer, they are an IT shop. That's what they do. And then I was going to roll back to what you were saying, Neil, about like, look for your superpower. Joe and I talk about this with the terminology we use is build versus buy, and customization kind of fits under the build piece. And it's exactly what you're saying. And I think what we saw in the data space in particular over the last 15 years is everyone was like, Hadoop is amazing, big data everywhere. And they went out and started building their own custom stacks. And it turned out that this was it looked cheap on paper, and then it was very, very expensive. And we're not anti-open source, but what we tell our clients is like, okay, there are advantages to open source, but should you really be managing it yourself? If you need the portability of open source, look at like managed services, look at using things that Amazon or Google offers off the shelf. And then if you ever need to customize down the road, you can kind of go in a different direction. But just grabbing open source for a small shop, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Managing your own clusters for a small shop probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you're starting out.
And I think that's a great point, because the organizations I've worked for, if they've got into the advanced analytic space, I've told them the thing that differentiation with data and with analytics is our brain power, not the tooling. What it's our thought process. There are people much smarter than we are at tooling that are great at tooling. And there's kind of an analogy. Would you ever build your own accounting system today? No. Would you ever build your own PCs today? Remember 20 years ago, there were people who built their organizations who built PCs. No, you don't do that. Experts. We've got expertise now. We've got experts who are better at this than we are. And besides, it's not the tooling that differentiates us in the marketplace. It's our thought process.
That's interesting. I mean, kind of bring this back with, you mentioned a lean kind of value stream mapping. How do you teach an organization to learn to see? This is learning how to see is it's a terminology in lean, right? I mean, how do you develop this sense of identifying waste in processes?
I'll tell you what I've done, and I don't know how effective it's been. It's worked at least marginally. Some years ago, I worked for a manufacturing company, so I was the CIO, but also the director of strategic planning. And so I owned the delivery of all of our strategic initiatives, and it was a manufacturing company. And so for several years, one of our strategic initiatives was get good at lean manufacturing. And then we kind of expanded it to just get good at lean in general. And so I developed this really basic 40-minute course on lean. I said, okay, here's what we're going to cover. We're going to cover the forms of waste. We're going to cover what I call the 4 principal tools: value stream mapping, 5S, standardized work, and visual controls. Don't worry, there are some other tools you can use, but if you're decent at these 4, you can handle 95%. You can eliminate 95% of the waste. And then I made a version for IT. And I told my teams, I said, okay, and then the assignment is each one of you, either at an individual level or at a team level, in the next 3 months, you need to, I want you to pick 2 targets. Think of something where you think there's a decent amount of waste, and then apply the right one of these 4 tools or combination, and then report to me on how you eliminated that waste. And then we socialize it. We have a monthly team meeting, and somebody talks about what they did to eliminate the waste. And what I've seen is that learning to see starts to take hold. And I don't need everybody to be good at it. I need enough people to be good at it that kernel grows. And pretty soon people are thinking that way. When I got to OC Tanner, we would do 1 for each of our products, 1 production deploy a year. Massive, huge projects. We plan these for months, and we set the crazy, unrealistic goal. Let's get to a daily deploy. And then ask the question, what must be true to get to a daily deploy? And let's work it backwards. And in answering the question, what must be true to get to a daily deploy, I'd already trained them on Agile, and I already trained them on Lean, and we got there. It took some time, but every cycle we got a little better. We took out more waste. We took out more friction. We took out more turbulence. And we got to the point where a daily deploy, that's nothing. We could do 1,000 deploys if we want to. But it all came from this lean thinking, Joe, where we asked ourselves, who are our customers? And where's the waste in our customers' process? And then what can we provide that'll reduce that waste? And that was their entire thought process. And I think there's incredible value in, especially for an IT organization, if we're going to influence the way the rest of the organization thinks, in getting good at lean. So I tell, let's train you, and let's practice. Practice. You'll get better at it. You'll get better. It's the same thing I tell people when I implement Agile. You're going to be terrible at it at first, but that's okay. Let's take an Agile approach to Agile. Let's get better at something every cycle. And then we'll get better and better. And 2 years later, we'll look back and we'll say, boy, we're amazing. But boy, we were terrible 2 years ago. It's okay. It's a journey. Don't forget the journey. So anyway, that's my answer, Joe. That's how I do it. And I think it's worked reasonably well.
Actually, there's a related question here. I was on to ask, I think she's asking, did you have something like an intermediate step, like a monthly deploy before you went to daily?
We got to monthly deploys, we got to weekly deploys, but the target was always asking ourselves, even if we're monthly deploys, well, we started with let's do 2 deploys a year. There's our short range goal. Then we'll do quarterlies, then we'll do monthlies, then we'll do weeklies. But we're always asking ourselves, what's blocking us from getting to a daily deploy? And so we didn't really we got to every 6 months, quarterly, monthly. We got to those on the path to the goal, which was a daily deploy. But we never set a goal of let's get to a monthly deploy. It was always let's eliminate whatever's blocking us from doing a daily deploy.
So that was always the North Star.
Yeah, and it took about 18 months. It took a couple of years, but that was okay because along the way we went from once a year to 6 months to quarterly to monthly to weekly. Mm-hmm. And so we were getting better and generating improved outcomes all along the way.
Speaking about waste, though, I've often found that one person's waste is another person's treasure, i.e., there's a reason the waste exists. right? It doesn't just happen in a vacuum. Sometimes it does, but I think that there's a lot of vested interest in keeping waste around. How do you deal with that?
That's a great question. And I think that shows up, like you talked about, when you're trying to standardize processes and reduce exception handling and such, because it gets personal when when you talk about changing a process, but this is the process where the person feels like they are the process expert. This is their thing. It is their superpower to handle that exception. And if I eliminate the exception handling, now it reduces my need for them. And so I think part of it is building relationships of trust with people as we're going through these processes, these change processes, so that they know that you have their best interests at heart. And I think another thing is building the case with them. And that's why change is always emotional, logical. When I started my career, I said, this change makes perfect sense. It doesn't matter if it makes perfect sense. It's emotional. So how do I change their emotional attachment to the thing they do? By tying their value to something that's of higher value. Let me give an example. So once inherited one of the big initiatives where I was the CIO is everything was on our hardware in co-location facilities. So one of our initiatives was get everything out of data centers and into the cloud. Well, I've got this staff that's amazing at managing hardware in data centers. And so we talk about a migration to the cloud. It creates the uncertainty, it creates the anxiety. Boy, this is a pretty big change for me. What if I can't do the change? What if it's not successful? What if I'm not successful? This is my thing. So part of it was the conversation of, first of all, let's build relationships of trust so you know that I have your best interests at heart. And secondly, start thinking about your role in terms of the services you provide rather than the place where you provide your services. You are amazing at delivering data into our pipelines. Now, right now, that data resides on our hardware in a data center. I need your brain on delivering data independent of where that data is located. And so sort of building their confidence, but also letting them see or giving them a vision into the future that their superpower is transferable to a different environment. And I'm not going to weaken their superpower. In fact, their superpower may be now more essential because putting it in the cloud makes it more, we can move it around better. We get to deal with geographies in a different way. We can move at a different pace. We can now experiment with different technologies anyway, making it a compelling reason. But the important message was you have valuable skills that you have tied to hardware, but don't need to be tied to hardware. And so like somebody in accounting that creates the custom invoices. Okay, let's think about this. What's the higher level value you can provide? Well, I create a custom invoice. No, what you provide is information for our customers so that they pay our bills without question because the invoices are accurate and they're timely. So let's talk about what can you do to improve the invoicing accuracy, completeness, and also accessibility of that data to our customers. And start to get them to apply their expertise to this higher level goal that gets them out of thinking that their job is to custom build an invoice. And instead, the job is to make billing data accessible, that's accurate, timely, and available at any time and anywhere instead of on their monthly invoice that they're emailing or shipping out. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling here, but I've found that that's how you connect to their emotions so that they're willing to make changes. And then the last thing I do is we sit in a lotus position and I have them repeat this mantra. I am not my process. I am not my process. And just over and over and over.
The cult of Niel. That's awesome. I'm kind of looping back to the beginning. I mean, there's a lot of change right now. There's we went through a pandemic, obviously. The economy is in all sorts of strange spots right now. I mean, what's your advice to IT leaders to navigate very turbulent environments?
I still think it goes back to, what do I have to do to be prepared for anything? If the organization comes to me and says, we need to cut costs, what can we do to cut costs without cutting services? Maybe I go to maybe I've already doing that analysis and say, here's the contribution we can make, but just know that these are changes we can make without sacrificing our critical initiatives, because we always have to be prepared for the future. We don't, if there's an economic downturn, let's be the people who come out of it better than anybody else in our space. So let's not do things that hurt our future. I think there's always opportunities to improve employee engagement. I think there are always opportunities to improve culture inside of IT. And so anything that improves IT's performance with the organization and credibility with the organization are things that I think help. And kind of going back to one of the places we started with, I never want IT to be seen as a cost center. So how do we get out of cost center mentality? One way is making sure that the services we deliver are exceptional, making sure we're really tight on delivery, that everything, it's hard to cut the department that's performing the best. So how can we be the best performing department in the organization, at the same time helping the organization future-proof? So I've kind of rambled there, Joe. I'm not sure I even got close to answering.
I'll answer it. Yeah, because I mean, it seems like this is a situation. What we notice is, a lot of companies will sort of hide in their shell, really, and just kind of wait for the the storm to blow over. Seems like these days are just storms galore. So I don't know that you can have that luxury of waiting a storm just because there seems to be new ones all the time. And so it seems what you're saying really is just you got to be intelligently aggressive and really go for the wins that are going to matter.
Yeah, because the way I've thought about it, I had this epiphany some years ago. If we're hunkering down, that means everybody else is too. If everybody else is too, maybe this is my opportunity to leap ahead of them rather than hunker down. And maybe we have to hunker down to some extent, but let's pick one or two things where we're going to go fast and we're going to be compelling. And so when things come up, we've leaped ahead of people because we didn't hunker down like everybody else did. But then you have to be selective. What are those one or two things that are worth that investment during a downturn?
How do you know?
I don't know. I think that goes back to what is customer sentiment? What's market sentiment? What are the trends? How do we know what the trends are? How do we validate, or at least iteratively improve our thinking about what the trends are? It goes back to, I think, this whole thing of, in a world of uncertainty, where do you make your bets, and what does it take to make a good bet? And I think that's an ongoing activity, whether good times or bad times. Where do I place my bets? I remember, Michael Porter, the guru of strategic planning, always said strategy isn't about deciding what to do, it's deciding what not to do. So what are the things we're not going to do? And let's get behind the things that we've chosen and give them the focus they need so we can be exceptional at the things we've chosen. I've seen too many organizations that decide they're going to be exceptional at everything, and I just think you can't. I don't think it's possible. So what are the one or two things? And I once got pulled into a startup that was struggling, and I looked at the sort of the product roadmap, and they were developing great technology in 12 areas. I said, let's pick the one that we think will have the biggest impact in the lives of our customers in the shortest period of time, and let's work on that one. And then when we've nailed that one, let's go to number 2 on the list, rather than doing 12 at once, because we were scattered, and our timelines were long, and our roadmaps were it was like, we'll deliver something in 18 months. No, what if we delivered something in 3 months? Because we focused on it, and just that. And it made a huge difference. I joke about here's I take a very lightweight approach to tracking and reporting on project status. My joke is always, okay, let's review our only the priority 1 projects. How many do we have on the list this month? Only 90 number 1 priorities. Like, sorry, you can't do that. What can we get it to 4? Could there be 4 things that matter more than anything else? And then could we give that clarity to the organization? We give that clarity to our teams that says, if you have any spare cycles at all, work on these 4 things. And don't worry about the other 86 until these 4 are really amazing. But it's just a hard discipline for us. It really is, because I think we want to support people. When somebody comes in, I need you to work on this. Okay, I'll work on it in my voluminous spare time, even when we don't have voluminous spare time. And then we starve the things that matter most.
It reminds me a lot of there's just a apocryphal tale of Warren Buffett's pilot, who I guess Warren, he flies with him a lot. Warren one day asked him, okay, so you work this job, like, what do you want to do in life? So he said, I want you to write out the 25 things you want to do and then rank them in order. Then he said, basically anything below 5, ignore it. It's a do not do list, actually, and that's a really powerful mechanism. But it's easy. I know Matt and I we attempt to be focused, and even then it's like, oh, number 10 priority, and it just happens. I think it's priority creep, right?
It is,
so,
and it's hard it's more difficult when you get entire organizations involved in it.
Mm-hmm. You get a lot of ideas, right? And they're good ideas too. That's the problem. And fundamentally, as much as the word is unpleasant, you have to cull ideas that are good ideas, but not the top priorities. You have to work together to do that.
And it tends to fall because now in this world of technology-driven everything, almost every idea has some technology component to it, which is how we end up with 90 number 1 priorities.
I guess how do you know when? I guess how would you put the safeguards in place if you're a young organization to continuously focus on what matters? Because it seems like priority creep, it happens everywhere. But how do you, I guess, instill the discipline to really continuously identify and reprioritize, I suppose, too, what those would be?
Yeah, you're asking the wrong guy, because I'm the guy with 90 number 1 priorities on my.
Okay, cool. So. So how did you become so successful at these priorities, Niel?
There's this book that was written some years ago by Greg McKeown, Essentialism, and it's kind of like your Warren Buffett story. One of the exercises, I enjoyed it so much, I had them come in and train my teams. And one of the exercises is, okay, take a minute and write down your top 6 priorities for the next month. Okay, now rank them 1 through 6. Okay, now get out your pencil and draw a line through numbers 2 through 6. And if all you had time to do was 1, what would it be? And I've tried to instill that, but boy, it is tough. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I've once at OZ Tanner, we had our 90 number 1 priorities. So I challenged the team. I said, let's at least cut it in half. So the next month when we got together to review the project status, there were only 45 number 1 priorities. So hooray, we met our goal. But then what I realized is what they had done is each of the 45 now had 2 parts.
Oh.
So we're still back in because none of us had the heart to drop anything or to prioritize it lower than a 1. So yeah, if somebody figures that out, please contact me. I need all the help I can get.
That's awesome. I guess switching gears, like, what advice do you have for newer IT leaders, the CIOs, CTOs?
I don't know.
Easy answer.
I think build relationships of trust with obviously the CEO and board of directors. Build relationships of trust with your executive team peers. Those relationships are critical. And then build relationships of trust with your team. And you can always ask a question, okay, what does it take to build relationships of trust? The motto for me that I live by is the one from good to great. Purpose over personal agenda. Mm. purpose of the team, purpose of the organization, purpose of the project is more important than I am. So build those relationships of trust. And then part of it also, like we talked about in the beginning, build credibility. Get really good at delivery. Our track record of delivery in IT is not that great. So through a combination of lean and agile, get really good at delivery, because you'll need that credibility in order to be influential. And then pick something. You can start small, start tiny, but something that you think could deliver a pretty massive impact on the organization in a relatively short period of time. I'll just give an example, since this is, you guys are the masters of data. I was at a university, and our number one metric of success was student graduation rates. And the university had played with lots of things to boost graduation rates and had just nudged them fractions of a percentage. And so we were, just talking about this in one 2-day offsite meeting about what can we do to improve graduation rates. And just change the faculty model, change the curriculum, change whatever. And I thought to myself, I wonder if we have enough data. And if we don't, could we get enough data to identify if a student is at risk and help them and rescue them before they get in trouble? Could we proactively identify an at-risk student and the reasons why they're at risk and help them before they get in trouble? And so just me and the guy that was our data scientist, he worked in another department, but he has started brainstorming this. We pulled in a few more people from both the technology and the academic side. And we started asking ourselves about what would be the indicators. So again, to go back to my 3 questions, what decisions would we like to be able to make? What information will we need to make those decisions? And where can we get that information? And we built a student success model that we then tested, hypothesis tested, saw we had pretty good results, and then expanded. And it became it was this little kind of skunk works off to the side project. We didn't invest much, a few $1,000s to do the initial analysis, but it ended up changing the support model. And we added more and more data all the time, which improved the modeling, which improved the algorithms, which improved the results. But it was sort of a home run. But because we started small, it was a very low risk home run because it was quiet. No one really knew about it until we started to see some results. And so pick something like that. It could be something with supply chain optimization. It could be something with, who knows, accounts payable analysis. It could be something. Maybe it's an RPA project where I'm going to take a repetitive task and I'm going to streamline it and I'm going to automate it so it's really simple and it flows. Maybe it's onboarding a new employee. Maybe it's offboarding an employee. Whatever it is. Maybe it's something as simple as no one ever has to call the service desk again for a password reset. Pick something like that that's going to make somebody's life better, that can have a pretty immediate impact at a fairly low cost and pretty quickly, and deliver something like that, because that starts to show people what's possible with technology while also building the credibility of your team, and build that into influencing everything that's going on. Because ultimately, when it comes to technology, if we're not the ones influencing those decisions, what do they need us for?
That's cool. Kind of closing out, you've written some books. Do you want to talk about those real quick? I think I have one here. Stand Back and Deliver, is that yours?
Stand Back was the first one, 2009, written with 3 others. It was part of the Addison Wesley Agile series. I talked about my model, where you look at things in 2 dimensions. To what extent is it differentiating, market differentiating, mission critical? I introduced that in that book. And the other one was the Agile culture. So Stand Back and Deliver was written mostly for sort of project agile management, Then while I had a full-time job, did a decent amount of consulting. I would just take a week of vacation off and go work with an organization somewhere. And so based on what I learned there, wrote the Agile Culture, which was more about what is the culture that supports enterprise or organizational agility. And in that, introduce a model called the trust ownership model. The idea being that if I want a culture where people thrive, I want a culture that's based on high trust, meaning I trust you, I'm not suspicious, I'm not going to control you. High trust and high individual and team ownership for delivering outcomes, rather than low ownership and high control. And then what are some ways approaches you can take to get to this culture? Because I think another part of building organizational agility is this notion of pushing decisions to the front edge. I tell people, when I started my career, my superpower was decision making. And a hard transition for me as a leader was when I recognized the best way to serve my team, the best way to serve my organization was for me to get out of the decision-making process by pushing it to the edges. I still make decisions, but at a different level. But the people on the front lines have the information, they have the experiences, they know best how to do things. So the whole idea of the Agile culture is, as a leader in an Agile culture, I want to be in the what business, but primarily in the why business. If I can focus on why, a little bit of what, and never make any how decisions. Because if I'm making how decisions, I've shifted from a culture of trust to a culture of control. Here's how you better do things. You better do it this way, or you should do it this way, or I suggest you do it this way. No, I got to get out of that. And I think in technical careers, oftentimes our technical experts are in leadership roles. And part of building that Agile culture is helping them understand that they now need to distribute their expertise to their teams, because otherwise they risk, and I risk, becoming a decision-making bottleneck and getting away from what I call a permission culture. People should never need permission to do the right thing. So
it's awesome.
Anyway, those are the books. But you know, like the royalty agreement, if you're going to buy one, buy 3,000, because then I might be able to buy a lunch. And
got to drive through.
Yeah, got to drive through. Yeah, not a nice lunch. And if you're really interested, just reach out to me, and because I've got electronic copies I can send you.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Do you have another book that you plan on writing?
You know, I've toyed with the idea of kind of extending this notion of the Agile culture and talking more about specifically how do you deal with the intense uncertainty in which we live. And I found some things that specifically help that go beyond what we covered or what I covered in the Agile culture. And so, but it's, to be honest, writing does not come naturally for me. It's work. I don't know if it was easy for you when you wrote your book, but for me, in fact, the Agile culture, I was so far behind schedule that the publisher called me and sentenced me, said, you take a week of vacation from your job and you get to sit in this house. I've arranged for you to sit in a house for a week, and all you can do is write. So I went for a week and I wrote like 12 hours a day and finally got it done. So
interesting.
But I always it was like that 90 number one priorities. It was one of my number one priorities that I never got to.
Yeah, 12 hours a day.
12 hours a day is gnarly. I mean,
it's rough.
Because it's the writing, but so there's also the thinking, right? So unless you've had the thinking, in place, it's just hard. I've known people who have done that too, who kind of at gunpoint have had to finish a book, and I just feel like the level of you really have to know what you're going to be writing about if you're going to be doing that, because that's a lot of pressure.
The thing that helped me is I read this book called Made to Stick. And they introduced this acronym SUCCESS. Concepts need to be simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, touch their emotions, and do it by telling stories. And so I would kind of lay out for each chapter, here are my big ideas that I want to get across in this chapter. And then how am I going to deliver on these success criteria in each chapter? Because I'm sort of a nerd. I'm not an interesting person, and that helped me. That framework kind of helped me make sure I wasn't just rambling like I do when I'm live like this.
Well, your ramblings are very, very intelligent, so it's makes for a good time. So, well, cool. Well, Niel, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. You know, I always like become way smarter talking to you. So it's awesome.
Well, just from my perspective, as somebody who's done business with you, I've always enjoyed learning from you. So
thank you.
I guess it's mutual.
Yeah, it is mutual. So cool. Well, have a good weekend.
Thank you.
And to the audience, Monday morning data chat. We have Laszlo Srenger. We're going to talk about software development principles intersecting with machine learning engineering. Laszlo is a OG in this field, so it's going to be great talking to him. And then coming on the heels next Friday, we have Josh Tobin, who just started a new ML company called Gantry. If you know Josh, he was one of the early people at OpenAI. So it's kind of all machine learning next week, so it's going to be a good fun time. So anyway, stay tuned. And by the way, if you want to buy another book, come check out the Fundamentals of Data Engineering. The digital copies are available now. The print copy, I think, is available sometime in July, but it's doing really well. It's already #1 in a lot of categories in Amazon, and I think Matt and I are very surprised. So enjoy. Cool. Well, Niel, it's good to talk to you. I'll talk to you soon.
It's an exciting place to be for sure.
Yeah. So, yeah. All right, cool. All right, see you guys. Thanks to the audience. Bye.